morning, guys. Huge week this week as far as gay rights goes, and I thought we could talk a bit about what this means for everyone, really, not just gay people, but Americans. Let's start by talking about the morning of the ruling. I'm curious where you guys were and what your reaction was.
Yeah, well, I was seated in the Supreme Court that morning, waiting on the decisions. We knew they were going to come between 10 and 10:30 a.m., so I was seated in the Supreme Court with our plaintiffs and with David Boies. And at 10 a.m., the 9 justices took their seats and they began to read decisions. We heard the decision in the DOMA case first, which was obviously incredible and exciting and historic. But in that courtroom, silence is enforced. So there was an inability to react in any way. And then came the Prop 8 ruling, and it became clear at the conclusion of the Chief's opinion as he read it that Proposition 8 and DOMA would be gone. And then we stood again in silence and walked out of that courtroom, and there were hugs, there were tears, and then we walked down the stairs and we heard the roar of the world as the plaintiffs descended those stairs and the thousands of people who had gathered outside. And then we all turned on our phones and our phones exploded. From text messaging and emails and Twitter. America won that day, and that's what's so incredible. We advanced this country forward tremendously.
My story's not half that sexy. I was at home here in LA, and I wasn't able to sleep at all. I bet you couldn't sleep at all.
There was no sleeping.
Yeah, and so I had already gone down and discovered for the first time that my coffee bean does not open until 7 a.m. So had to make my own, and then sat in front of SCOTUS blog for the next hour and just seeing if anyone was talking about it, when things would get going. And then of course as the updates finally started to come in, trying my best to interpret them as quickly as possible, because my phone was blowing up in a different way from people saying, what does this mean? And to me, what was remarkable is that it quickly seemed apparent that Kennedy's decision on DOMA and the broadness of that ruling meant that I was starting to see a much clearer path, not just for California, but for the nation, to enjoy this feeling of liberation we're feeling because of successfully defeating Prop 8, that the nation hopefully can start to feel that in areas like Texas, where I grew up, Virginia, where my family lives, or where you're from in Arkansas.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost too big to really conceive of what this means as far as just a sea change in how people view all rights. Could you put that in words at all? How big is this, and what does it mean?
Look, you have to really put it in context of the constant struggle for civil rights in the history of this country, from women's rights to the civil rights movement for African Americans in the 50s and 60s, to the modern gay rights movement of the last decades. And there is no question. That opinion written by Justice Kennedy, he wrote the 2 historic gay rights rulings prior to this. Justice Kennedy has solidified his spot in the history of this country as it relates to civil rights and to the advancement and inclusion of all Americans in that promise of equal justice under the law. Because when any group of our citizens are treated as less than equal, everyone is unequal. And we are one step closer. We aren't there yet. There are still 37 states in places like Texas, where Lance grew up, or Arkansas, where I grew up. I was in Utah yesterday. 37 states that still don't have equality, still don't even have the basic protections under the law in those states. So we've got a long ways to go, but the decision in these 2 cases advanced this movement tremendously.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like these cases also set an example for any diversity movement going forward, which was what came out of these cases were so many rich stories. And it was the stories of our plaintiffs and their families. It was the stories of Edie Windsor. It was the stories that sparked in all of the different areas of the nation, people being brave enough to come out, to tell us who they are, who their family is, in all of its diversity. And I think set a really good example in this modern age of Twitter and Facebook and all these new means by which we tell our stories. It helped us understand the power of that. Because not only did we have a win at the Supreme Court, but we had a win culturally. And you watch how in just these short years we've moved from a majority of people not being on the side of equality in this country to now a pretty strong majority of the country being in favor of gay and lesbian equality. And I tell you, that happens not because of all the politics, not because of all the legal talk. It happens because hearts are changed, and hearts are changed by stories being told. And honestly, I think it's why this town is so critically important to the civil rights movement, because we're the storytellers.
I will definitely get to that in a second. I want to address, sort of to bring the party down, the 4 dissenting judges, and also Governor Chris Christie. I don't know if you saw, put out a statement saying that the way the ruling went was somehow infringed upon the rights of people who support DOMA, like as if that, what do you say to them and to people who agree with them?
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, our job is to bring those who are against us and who are fighting equality to our side. So we have to continue this conversation that Lance was talking about. We have to continue to tell our stories. Because when you know us, when you know your neighbor or you know your child is gay, then you don't want them to have less rights than you do. That's the story of Harvey Milk. Harvey Milk taught us so long ago, the most important thing we can do is come out of the closet and tell our stories. And I'm seated next to the greatest storyteller of all times. And he sort of brought Harvey's story to the world for all of us to see. And perhaps it took us too long to realize what he was teaching us, but I think that all of those who are on the other side, whether they are prominent folks like a governor in New Jersey who hopes to be president someday, or a justice on the Supreme Court, at the end of the day, everyone will evolve on this issue. In the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s, one of the single greatest opponents to equality in the 50s and 60s was Governor George Wallace. At the end of the day, even Governor Wallace evolved to the right side of history. And I think, too, most people, even our opponents, will ultimately catch up. Now, as it relates to someone in elected office, I think it's going to become increasingly difficult to advance one's career if you're opposed to the basic principle of fairness, equality, and dignity. So it's unfortunate that Governor Christie really solidified his position on the wrong side of history. He vetoed marriage equality when it passed in the state of New Jersey with bipartisan support. But I do continue to have hope that Governor Christie and others will ultimately evolve to the right side of history.
And do you think it's important once they do to let the animus go and to have no sort of hard feelings and welcome these people that were once sort of set up as enemies?
Look, our job is to convince those who aren't with us to join us, and once they join us, we embrace them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is an education campaign. This isn't war. This is dispelling generations of myths about gay people, stereotypes that have been spread for generations at the pulpit through sort of government-endorsed discrimination, which we still have in so many states. This is about dispelling all of that, because it's not true. You saw that in this court case for Proposition 8, when the opposition had to come into the courtroom and raise their right hand and tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but. First off, many wouldn't even come in because they knew their science was junk science. They knew what they were saying wasn't true. And the one who did, under cross-examination, changed his mind about equality. In fact, changed his mind on the stand and then did an op-ed in the New York Times saying he changed his mind. This is an education campaign. It is not a war. When people learn about the truth, they open up to equality. They understand who we really are, and that we're not all the scary things they've been taught, in their hometowns, in their churches, or in their communities over these years. So, are you kidding me? Of course we embrace them. We're thrilled that they finally figured out who their brothers and sisters, as Americans, their brothers and sisters in this country, who we really are. I think one of the critical moments in sort of entertainment is when a TV show called The Real World hit the airwaves on MTV. And John Murray had the strength and the wisdom to say, guess what? The real world has gay and lesbian people in it. And it's about time we start presenting that side of the truth and who these people really are, and including them in the fabric of the quote-unquote real world. And I think, it was one of the first times we had seen gay and lesbian people depicted as who they were. I mean, this is people playing themselves. And they became the center and stars of that show. I mean, who can forget Pedro Zamora in the 3rd season in San Francisco? And after that, and starting to see how young people embraced this show because they said, boy, this is finally starting to feel real, because I do know some gay and lesbian people. They might not all be out yet, but we sort of know who they are in our schools, and I recognize this, and this does feel real. And you start to see the inclusion of gay and lesbian people in TV shows. And it started off slow, and it started to build, and we get to things like Will and Grace and Ellen. And really what's important is that these shows not only included gay and lesbian people, but the countries seem to fall in love with these shows and with these characters. And I think it's because it's finally felt more real. There's nobody in this country who doesn't know a gay and lesbian person. They might not know that that person's gay or lesbian, but everybody knows someone who's gay or lesbian in this country. And for the first time, Hollywood was stepping up and doing what we do best, and it was starting to turn a mirror on the country and say, this is who we are. This is who we are as a family. And thankfully, the show succeeded and got big ratings, and the movies like Brokeback Mountain came along and got huge numbers at the box office and made it possible for me to do something like Milk. I stand on the shoulders of all of these shows. But we cannot overestimate the importance of LGBT characters in stories coming out of Hollywood. It is the way in which we, as a country, look at ourselves, through the media that comes out of here. And we have to be included, I think, in a way that is proportional to the truth of how we exist in these various communities, because that's going to do a lot of good in bringing people around to the side of equality.
Yeah, first of all, what I would add to that, I said earlier, the greatest storyteller in the world is seated next to me. And what Lance did with bringing Milk, LGBT folks just 10 years ago didn't realize that they had heroes. Because they often weren't written about, we weren't taught about them in school. I certainly wasn't taught about Harvey Milk when I was a kid growing up in Arkansas in my history classes. Harvey Milk should have been front and center of a history book. And Lance brought Harvey's story and his courage to the world, to those young kids who didn't realize that they had heroes. And what's been incredible is the partnership that Lance and I have had to be able to bring about this case. Lance talked about culturally what has happened in this country and the entertainment industry being really at the forefront of that and reflecting our lives and really reflecting culture. And there's so much more, I think, that can be done there. But specifically as it relates to this case, make no mistake about it, Prop 8 is gone for a lot of reasons. But one significant reason is because folks in this community, in the entertainment community, stood up and helped lead the way. So once Lance and I joined together, we had Rob and Michelle Reiner who wrote that first check to allow us to start doing the research, and people like John and Mike August and Katie and J.J. Abrams and Norman and Lynn Lear, really folks in this industry really stood up. Then we were finally able to file this case because David Geffen stood up in a massive way. And David committed at a lunch one day that he would give us $1.5 million and allow us to go forward. And he called his friend and our friend, Steve Bing, and asked him, a straight philanthropist in this community, and asked him to match him. And that $3 million allowed us to move forward to execute this case with as close to perfection as possible. And since then, so many others in the industry, like Yardley Smith, a good friend of ours, is one of the major contributors. But then there was a key moment. When we went forward and the judge ordered a trial in the Prop 8 case, for the first time in our nation's history, discrimination against gay and lesbian people was put on trial. Unfortunately, in a technicality, our opposition went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court to prevent broadcast of that trial. We now know why. Because when one is under oath, it proves to be a bit of a truth serum, and our opposition has a tough time when they actually have to tell the truth. But we committed on that day, when the Supreme Court blocked those cameras in the courtroom, that we were going to do everything in our power to tell the story to the world of what happened in that courtroom. And Lance wrote the most brilliant play based on the actual trial transcripts. Nothing was made up. And then cast people like Brad Pitt and George Clooney and so many others so that we could tell this story to the world and bring more people along this journey with us. And I just give so much credit to this industry, to this community, for our success in this case and for the movement's success as a whole. So many people play a role, but no question, this community has been at the forefront of this battle, just as they were in the battles of the 50s and 60s.
You know, Sony chairman Amy Pascal recently gave a speech where she asked everyone in Hollywood to go through your scripts, and if you see slurs, anti-gay language, black it out with a black marker. I don't know if you're aware that she did that. Do you feel, first of all, that that's good advice? And what is the state of scripts right now? I mean, sometimes there was like a Ron Howard film, and there was a trailer where the F word popped up randomly in this trailer. What more can we be doing to change sort of mainstream, casual instances of what could be interpreted as homophobia?
More diverse writing staffs for television, more diversity in the feature world. You know, I think, yeah, there may be some writers out there, filmmakers out there that have some sort of bias, but for the most part it's ignorance. It's just not knowing how hurtful that is. And you can solve that by having people in the room who understand it. You know, and I'm not just talking about having diversity with LGBT writers in the room. I mean in every way. You know, there's not enough women in the writers' room. There's not enough people of color. It's like this. It really would be helpful if we're talking about having more understanding in cinema and in television, to have people who understand what the effect is, what the hurt could be in those rooms. And so, you know, it's something I always push for, and it actually harkens back to some of the stuff that Harvey Milk always said. It's like, at the end of the day, he said you had to elect gay people because gay people will watch out for themselves and their own interests more than others will. Well, you know, if we want to have more diversity in film and television, we need to have more diversity in who's creating it. So I think that's the first step. You know, just saying to go and black out certain words, I don't think that I understand the sentiment of that, and I like that we want to go that direction, but I think the solution has to go deeper and really get to the root of why we still see that in film and television.
It seems like the next big frontier is professional sports, and we had pretty big news this year with Jason Collins coming out, still an active NBA player. Robbie Rogers, professional soccer player, who's now playing with the LA Galaxy. I wonder if you could talk a bit to that and what that could do for the gay community.
No, absolutely. And again, we go to the power of coming out of the closet. It was incredible that those two stars came out of the closet. Before them, we had women NBA stars that had come out of the closet, and they're blazing the trail. Much like Ted Olson. Before Ted Olson stepped up on this case, we had one prominent Republican supporting marriage equality, and that was former Vice President Cheney. After Ted Olson opened the door, so many others walked through it. And that's exactly what happens. Whether you are a star in entertainment, or you're a star in sports, or in any other field, a star in business, you make it easier for others. And look, it's always one's choice ultimately to decide. It's a very personal journey to decide when to come out of the closet in your own private life, but those who have a public life, of when to step forward. And I just give so much credit to those who do so, because when they do it, it makes life so much better for countless, thousands upon thousands of young people in this world. You change lives by being honest about who you are. And that's what's so incredible about those who are stepping up and doing that. And I believe that others will follow. Look, we all know there are LGBT people in all aspects of society. We are CEOs, we are sports stars, we are movie stars, we are teachers, we are firefighters. And the more that come out of the closet, it just makes it easier for that next generation. And for that young kid who is in a small town in Texas or in a small town in Arkansas where we grew up, to see on television Jason Collins coming out of the closet, it provides a role model. It says that that young person is not second class, and that he or she can grow up with the same hopes, dreams, and aspirations as his or her family and peers in high school or junior high. So it's incredible. We need more to do it, though.
Well, and let's be honest, it's great when folks in Hollywood come out and do that. But right now, I feel like, and we've talked a good bit about this, there's a whole area of the country that's being left out of this equality movement, and it's the area we grew up in. And in those areas, it's tough to come out, and partly because there's still laws. There are not laws there protecting you. If you come out, you can still lose your job in most of these areas. You can lose your home in many of these areas. And so people have a really difficult time coming out. But you know what they also like in those areas? Sports. I grew up there. I knew what we were doing every Saturday and Sunday. We were either watching football or NASCAR, right? And it's like, when some of these sports folks come out in those areas, it really just, it makes people in the places like my family, in these places, stop and think, boy, I guess they're right. It really is everyone. Gay and lesbian people can do anything. I didn't quite know that. They're not those things I hear about and those sort of stereotypes I hear about. They can throw a football and drive a race car as good as anybody. And like Chad said, they are out there. I know a bunch of them, and I encourage them to take this moment and to follow the lead of the Jason Collinses and to start to come out. Because when you do that, it is life-saving, particularly in those southern areas that still need so much help.
And speaking about these battleground states, I mean, there still is a lot more work to be done. What's next?
Well, look, what's next? I talked about this in Utah yesterday. And I very intentionally went from California on the day of our decision to the very next day to one of the reddest states of all, Utah, a place where Lance has done a lot of work and spent a lot of time. We now have two Americas. Stark contrast. We have Americans that live in those states. 30% of America now lives in states with marriage equality. Those marriages are now recognized by the federal government thanks to those historic Supreme Court decisions. That means we have 70% of the country to go. But if you live on one side of the state border, legally, you have full equality. You are protected when you go to the hospital, you have rights, you have privileges, and you have the same protections as straight married couples. But then there's the rest of America. You step across that state line, and in many of these places, you have zero protections. So instead of slowing down, we've got to double down now that we've won these two great victories this week. And we've got to commit ourselves to fight like we've never fought before for those Americans that live in the other 37, the 37 states that don't have equality. And as Lance said, it's not just marriage equality. In more than half the states in this country, it is perfectly legal to fire someone because they're LGBT. Really? Even the simple act of putting a photo on your desk with your life partner can get you fired. Perfectly legal. So Congress needs to act and pass a fully inclusive Employment Non-Discrimination Act so that these folks are protected. And we've got to fight on all fronts in all 50 states. And I set a new goal yesterday that within 5 years, we'll bring full equality, including marriage equality, to every state in this country. And we've got to fight like hell to reach that goal. And we've got to do it with a great sense of urgency, because every single day of delay, there is a young kid in Hope, Arkansas, or in a small town in Texas who is struggling to come out of the closet and whose life is impacted by these laws, and unfortunately negatively by the lack of these laws.
Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about?
No, thank you for following this issue and for following it so closely.
I guess, Dustin, I'm curious what's next for you as far as writing goes.
Oh yeah, I have to make movies. That's right. Oh, there's that. Oh boy, I don't think it's the time to break this news yet. I haven't signed the contract, but there is a big gay and lesbian project that I have that we're gonna do on a major network television project, and so that's getting going.
You know, I disagree. I think this is the time to
Yeah, I know you do. I got to sign some things first. I'll give it to you first. I will
take you up on that.
In a couple of weeks, I promise you that. But you know, I mean, I'm still making movies. I delivered. It's pretty. I was fortunate that the script I had due this week was for J.J. Abrams, who was one of the great supporters of our case, because I was like, buddy, there is no way I am getting any work done on Tuesday or Wednesday as we wait for this decision to come down, and then we, you know, do the work to celebrate it. And he understood. So, but I did yesterday have to shut off all the phones, take a deep breath, and to finally hit send on my first draft of Earthquake for J.J. Abrams. So there's still movies coming. And then, of course, Under the Banner of Heaven for Ron Howard is the other big one that we're going to shoot in the spring.